Welcome back, besties. I'm Wyatt Paints. I've got a monster of a video for this one. I got commissioned to print and paint a full-size Vecna bust. I'll be sure to put a link to the STL in the description below. Also, somebody asked for some more of the printing details on the models that I paint on here, so here goes this one. Even though I scaled this down about 15% to fit on my printer, it still is over 21 inches tall, 16 inches wide, used over 1,700 grams of resin, and took over 68 hours to print. I'm just gonna put that at 69. With that all out of the way, let's head over to my spray booth and let's get started. And welcome to my spray booth. Now, I've tried my best not to use my airbrush on this channel to maintain it at a novice to intermediate level, but here I'm just gonna be using it to block in different areas of color for later when I'm painting with my brush. Just know you could do all of this with a brush. I'm just doing it now to save a bit of time and give myself an easy to follow guide when I'm using my brush. In fact, all of the colors I use here will be the same ones I use when I go back over it with my brush. First, to establish my darkest red tone, I use sanguine all over, but I feather this out on the tendrils to maintain that base black. While the airbrush speeds up this process, it's important for me not to rush and to slowly build up the tone I want. Going too fast will result in me having a very splotchy saturation. While this early in the painting it's not a huge problem, I want to save myself some headaches later. Next, I mixed in some scarlet into my brush. This tone was going to be the start of the mid-tone, so I more heavily applied this along the more fleshier bits. I figured this was a good point to start getting color on the face as well. Since Vecna had to stay in 2 pieces for shipping, putting his head in place at this point of the painting will let me match the tones better so that the head will look like it belongs to this neck. I made sure to rotate the model a lot to ensure that I got adequate coverage in all of the cracks and hard to reach areas. After a few spins, Vecna was looking positively rosy. To add some drama to the shadow, I sprayed on some purple ink. It's a little hard to see in this lighting, but this step was necessary to break up all that red and add a bit more depth back to the shadows. And since sanguine has a bit of purple in it, it blended really well. Of course, his face got the purple ink shadow treatment as well. I kept this spray coming from below his face in order to keep the lighting consistent. Moving back to highlights, I loaded up bloody red into my airbrush to really push the contrast and saturation for the large organic masses. I did my best to mind where I had just put down shadow so I didn't undo my work. Finally, I moved on to Midland Flesh to block out his fleshiest parts of his face, mainly that big old 5 head of his. I also picked out some areas of the border that I felt were particularly fleshy. Once everything was dry, I moved over to my painting table. First, I'd like to say thank you to all my subscribers over on Patreon. Thank you very much for your continued support. If you'd like to join them, there are links to my Patreon below. Also, technically, this is the first video that has sponsored content because the macho sent me 5 bottles of resin. Pretty sure that makes him my internet daddy. Thanks, Daddy. Now back to Vecna and some brush work. With my color and highlight guide locked in, I started with sanguine on a heavy stipple to reestablish that dark tone. While I do this, keep in mind that you're seeing this bust only under my painting lights, which are so bright it makes the darker portions read as gray. Also, when I put the final gloss coat on, it will darken everything lots. So it's best not to get too hung up on getting things dark to create contrast, and just trust that these shadows are going to be a few steps deeper in the end. I followed this up by adding scarlet to the mix and started working my way through my highlight colors. This is also where my camera's auto color temp feature would not make up its mind. Thankfully, the paint was more cooperating than my camera, as this layer went on perfectly. I had half a mind to leave it like this, but I knew after a gloss coat, this would look mostly black, so I had to push on. And push on I did, as I moved focus to the face to match the color tone of the base. Hey, that rhymes. Since it's a wall bust, I guess it's not a base, but I don't really have a better name for it, so we're gonna stick with that for now. Either way, after a few minutes, I had them synced up and looking good. Now this is a time where I took a bit of a mental break while I just blacked out his nose. Honestly, this was a great spot to just sit and think about this project and how it was affecting me. And boy, did it stress me out. There's a big difference between painting for yourself and painting for money. When I paint for me, I just do it and try new things. And whether or not it's good enough to find a place on my shelf, it's a fun journey on its own. But when I'm painting a commission, the stress is through the roof. Before I even applied a drop of paint, I was convinced my client would hate it. Every color choice was racked with guilt over whether or not they would like this color. And while my client encouraged me and loved every update photo that I sent them on the project, I could not escape the feeling that on delivery, everything would be wrong. If you get that feeling too, push through it, because the worst that can happen is just they don't like it. That's it. No one's gonna chop my hands off or say I can't paint anymore because one client wasn't satisfied. But fortunately for both me and my client, I think this bust turned out pretty good, so you should be happy. The next step for Vecna is bringing bloody red into the mix. I kept this focused on the larger boils on his base. The hope was to sell this idea of a transition from an unknown black substance to something flesh-like, but still otherworldly. For this to work, it's super important at this point to make sure that my brush motions are more sweepy and less stabby. This will keep the paint on top of the peaks of the details while leaving the valleys untouched. I went back over these same details again with just pure bloody red. This is a quick once over to really push the saturation as far as I could before I transitioned my way to Midland Flesh. I followed this by mixing in that Midland Flesh at a 50-50 mix to start building up the tones of the fleshier bits of the bust. I feel like I could have had a lighter hand at this because I feel too much lightness on the base is distracting. If I had to do this again, I think I would commit to less Midland Flesh on the base so that his head got more attention, as it is the focus. To add a bit of texture to the shadows, I laid down some thin Blood for the Blood God. I know this looks a little wonky, and that's due to Blood God having a gloss finish. You'll have to trust me that it'll work out fine. Or don't trust me and skip to the end real quick to check. For those that didn't check, thank you for your faith in me. For those that did check, told you so. I followed the Blood God up with a 75-25 mix of Midland and Bloody Red to feather off the edges of the shadows and set up for my next highlight. This was mostly focused on his face, but I did add a bit to his neck to further marry the two parts. Next, I took some blue ink and thinned it down with equal parts water to draw in his veins. Now, I do plan on going over this with my final highlight layers, but adding these now will let me put those layers in on top and really sell the idea that this vein is below the skin. And lucky for me, I was just in frame to get this on camera. I gotta work on that. Then came the hard part, eyes. Ugh. Since I had a sanguine base already, it saved me some time, as I usually like to start eyes with a red or black base. For colors, I stuck to Uniform Gray and Stonewall Gray. 2 coats of Stonewall established the whites of his eye, and a coat of Uniform for his iris. Then I used red ink to pin wash each lid. This wash helps transition smoothly from the reddish skin to the white of his eye. Next, I wanted to add some texture for his iris, so I started stippling in a gradient from Uniform Gray to Stonewall Gray within his iris. Then I thinned down my eye colors even more and put some strokes from the center going outward to give him some very erratic cataracts. For final detail, I busted out my pastels and mixed a bit of ultramarine and black to add a bit of shadow variation. I only picked out 6 or 7 spots for this, as less is definitely more. These will look super harsh and stand out tons now, but once the final varnish goes on, they'll meld into the whole. And bam! This was a beast of a project. While I'm not one for the horror genre, I'm a little sad to see this piece go. Who knows? Maybe I'll make another and hang it in my bathroom. I'm pretty sure nothing will speed up potty time for my guests like Vecna giving the hardest coked out stare he can muster. Fingers crossed that I packed this well enough to survive the trip from California to Virginia and my client. I want to thank you all for watching my video to the very end. If you're new here and liked it, be sure to slam that sub button and you'll get served up more of my content as I make it. And if you really want to show me some love, you can throw me a like too. And if you didn't like it, well, you could leave me a comment and tell me what you would like to see. I'm all ears. And as always, thanks for watching, stay creative, and always try to enjoy the process.